So when you think about securing a blockchain, you've got to throw out the old playbook. We're not talking about firewalls or antivirus software here. See, security in this world, it's all about economics. It's about making it so ridiculously, absurdly expensive to cheat the system that any sane person would just say, nope, not worth it. All right, let's dive into this really cool field of attack cost modeling.
I mean, this is the big question, right? This is the central puzzle. In a world where there's no CEO, no central server room, no single off switch, how in the world do you build a fortress? This is the exact problem that this whole field of crypto economics and attack cost modeling was born to solve.
So here's the plan. We're going to trace the evolution of this incredible security arms race. We'll kick things off with the simple math that holds all of this together. Then we'll look at the massive defenses of Bitcoin and Ethereum, explore where the real fights are happening today, and finally, uncover the ultimate last line of defense.
Okay, let's start with first principles. It turns out that the security of these gigantic trillion-dollar networks, it all boils down to one incredibly simple yet really powerful economic idea.
So that's the textbook definition. But what it really means is this. Attack cost modeling isn't about building unbreakable walls. It's about calculating the exact price an attacker would have to pay to cause trouble and then cranking that price up so high that it's just completely irrational to even try.
And this right here, this is the golden rule. This is the entire game in one simple image. As long as the cost to attack the network is way, way bigger than any profit you could ever hope to get from it, the network is safe. The whole goal is to keep this scale tilted heavily to the left side.
Bitcoin was the first to really crack this problem, and its approach was basically brute force. It built its fortress out of pure energy and highly specialized computer chips, creating this massive thermodynamic barrier that you just couldn't ignore.
Now this number, it's just mind-boggling. An exahash is a quintillion calculations per second. To mount an attack, you'd have to somehow match all of that. And we're not just talking about the electricity bill here. You literally can't get your hands on that many specialized computer chips. The global supply chain itself becomes part of the defense mechanism. It's wild.
And this is the question that completely changed the game, especially for smaller networks. Okay, so attacking Bitcoin itself is pretty much impossible. But what about all the other networks that use the same type of hardware, just less of it? Well, this is where a huge vulnerability started to show up.
And here's the playbook. What's so brilliant and kind of scary about this is that marketplaces like NiceHash turned a massive capital expense, building a giant mining farm, into a simple operating expense. It was like renting a cloud server for an hour. And attackers did exactly this, successfully hitting a whole bunch of smaller coins just by renting the firepower they needed to rewrite history.
So this whole rent and attack model, it really exposed a weakness in security that's based purely on energy. And that led to the next big evolution, proof of stake. The idea here is different. The fortress isn't built from outside resources like electricity. It's built from the very asset you're trying to protect.
And this is the absolute key difference. In a proof-of-work attack, if you fail, yeah, you've wasted a ton of money on electricity, but you still own all your expensive mining rigs. You can just try again later. In proof-of-stake, the consequence is so much worse. The money you use to launch the attack is itself at risk of being completely destroyed by the protocol. Just look at the scale of Ethereum's capital fortress. It's staggering. Over $111 billion are locked up just to secure the network. If you wanted to even try to disrupt it, you'd first have to go out and buy tens of billions of dollars worth of ETH, which, by the way, would send the price to the moon. And slashing is how the network enforces the rules. It really is the protocol's nuclear option. If you're a validator and you try to cheat the system, the network automatically burns. Poof! A chunk of your staked money is gone. This isn't a fine, it's not a penalty. It's the on-chain deletion of your assets.
This quote from Vitalik Buterin just nails it. It perfectly captures the advantage here. Think about it. If a proof-of-work network gets attacked, you can't just push a software update that deletes the attacker's physical hardware. But in proof-of-stake, if some attacker manages to get a giant pile of the network's own coins to attack it, the community can actually coordinate and just burn that stake away with code. Okay, so the base layers of Bitcoin and Ethereum have become these incredible fortresses. But attackers are smart. They adapt. They don't waste their time trying to knock down the castle walls anymore. The whole battle has moved to newer, sometimes more vulnerable layers that are built right on top.
And you can see it right here. Direct attacks on the core consensus layer. That's now a tiny slice of the pie.
The real action, the real risk, has shifted to places like governance, this new world of restaking, and especially the bridges that connect all these different blockchains together.
So what do these new attacks even look like? Well, the absolute biggest risk today is with bridges, those pathways that let you move money between blockchains. A single bug in a bridge's code can be, and has been, exploited to drain billions. Then you've got governance bribes. Instead of spending a fortune to buy control, you just cheaply rent it by paying voters to pass some malicious proposal. And finally, you have restaking. That's just reusing your staked ETH to secure other protocols. It sounds efficient, but it creates this risk of contagion, where a failure in one tiny service could cascade and threaten the security of a whole bunch of others.
These new attacks are really complex, and honestly, the economic models to defend against them are still being figured out. But that leads to a huge question. What happens when a model is wrong, or the code has a bug? What happens when a catastrophic attack actually succeeds? Well, that brings us to the final, and frankly, the most powerful line of defense in all of these networks.
The most famous example, of course, is the DAO hack. An attacker found a bug in the code and started draining tens of millions of dollars. Now here's the crazy part. According to the strict rules of the smart contract, the theft was technically valid. Code is law, as they said. But the human community behind Ethereum just said no, that's not what we meant. And they took the extraordinary step of coordinating to literally turn back the clock and reverse the theft. That moment was so important. It proved that for Ethereum, at least, the will of the community could be more powerful than the literal interpretation of the code. And this is the ultimate deterrent. It's the shared belief, the mutual understanding that even if an attacker pulls off the impossible, even if they execute a perfect technical attack, the community will just refuse to accept their version of history. They will coordinate, they'll push a fix, and they'll make that attacker's incredibly expensive victory completely and utterly worthless.
So let's wrap this up with a quick comparison. This table lays it all out. Bitcoin's security is built on a massive, ongoing expense in energy and hardware. Ethereum shifts that to locked-up capital, the asset itself. And this new frontier, things like governance, it's much more vulnerable to cheap operational costs like bribes and exploits. It's just a totally different kind of risk to model. So, if there's one thing to take away from all this, it's this. The core fortresses of Bitcoin and Ethereum are, for all practical purposes, incredibly secure. The real active battlegrounds have moved out to the edges. The weak points aren't in the core protocols anymore, but in the complex and sometimes messy applications and connections built on top of them.
And that kind of leaves us with one final big question. We've built these amazing systems of economic and computational security, but as they get more and more complex, as they get more intertwined with finance, and as they rely more on human coordination, you have to wonder, is the weakest link in the chain no longer the code, but us, the people who run it?